So I got a question from a viewer about oxygen utilization issues, and I just want to dig into this a little bit because there's a lot of really bad information out there about helping your body use oxygen better and breath work and just information that's really wrong. Like wrong with a capital F, as in like what the So in this video, I just kind of want to go under what are the issues that can create problems with your body utilizing oxygen correctly and steps you can take to improve the situation. You don't want to miss this.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So over on our video for Why Am I Always Tired, Sharon asked, hey TC, could you please make a video explaining how to fix low oxygen utilization issues with supplements or diet, because I have it and I'm always fatigued. And I don't know Sharon, I don't know her situation, so I'm not giving her advice. I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving you any medical advice, but I'll put some links in the description below for some of these articles if you want to dig deeper into these topics that we're going to talk about. And oxygen utilization issues certainly can create fatigue issues like Sharon was talking about, but there's also a lot of other issues that can create a person to really be fatigued. So we'll put the link to that video so you can check that out and look at some of the other causes if the oxygen issue is not a problem for you. But the first thing that we need to do when we're talking about oxygen utilization issues is that we need to kind of look at some of the myths. And it kind of seems like people usually think that it's really about oxygen intake. It's about getting more oxygen into your body so your body has more oxygen to utilize. But you can get one of these pulse oximeters cheap. They're like 20, 30 bucks or something. You just put it on your finger and it kind of gives you a reading, and it gives you a reading of your pulse and also the saturation of oxygen in your blood is basically what it's telling you. And most human beings are going to kind of ride along in that range of between 95 to 99. That's where most people are going to be in their oxygen saturation in their blood level. That's where they're going to kind of be all the time. And so there's not a really big range of really having the ability to increase that percentage a whole lot. You're not going to do a whole lot to really change that percentage. But the even bigger myth is that people will look at this pulse oximeter and say, oh, this is what's going on. 99, I'm really doing great. But that's just an indication of that oxygen level in the blood. It's not really telling you the amount of oxygen that your body can actually utilize. That's what we need to do to correct oxygen utilization issues, is we need to set it up so the body can actually use that oxygen. So the biggest issue when we're looking at our breathing, this mechanism that happens from the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is kind of like this system in the body that runs a lot of the show behind the curtains. Like you don't have to think about breathing, you just kind of breathe. And if you don't, you just kind of die. So this is all things that happen automatically through that autonomic nervous system. And when we breathe, the ability to regulate CO2 is actually a bigger factor to the body than to bring oxygen into the body. It's the regulation of this CO2 that we exhale, that we get rid of when we exhale. So that's really the big effect that kind of drives how often we're going to breathe and the rate at which we breathe and that kind of stuff. And when we're looking at a lot of these mistakes with breath work, a lot of breath work coaches are just really driving people in the wrong direction. And the biggest factor when we're looking at this oxygen utilization issue is what's called the Bohr effect. And this is something that we learned in 8th grade science class, and then we just kind of never talked about it again. But basically, the Bohr effect states that when the blood leans too alkaline, that all of a sudden the oxygen can't leave the blood and get down to the tissues where it really needs to be so that we can utilize it to create energy and all these other things that oxygen has to do. So when the blood leans too alkaline, that oxygen will kind of get trapped in the blood. And the blood pH, it really stays within a very narrow range. When you're talking about somebody's blood leaning too acidic or too alkaline, it's a very small range that it's moving. If it moves too far out of that range, we just kind of get dead. So the body really does a lot to keep that pH in the right range so that we can function as a human being. So a lot of these breath work coaches will tell us that, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take forcefully strong breaths in and breaths out. And we're going to breathe really strong in and out. And this is going to bring more oxygen into the system. And look, you can look at the pulse oximeter. It's showing you that more oxygen is there. It was only at 95 before. Now it's at 100. You're really doing it. Way to go. You might feel dizzy and lightheaded, but that's okay. That's just your body making changes. You're becoming one with your spiritual self. You're having a spiritual episode and you become dizzy and maybe you even pass out. But that's great. Good job. So let's look at what's really happening when we're doing this. When we're looking at this situation of our breath rate and the blood pH, and we're understanding the science behind the Bohr effect, what we look at in the average human in their natural breath rate, the rate at which they breathe, most humans are going to fall somewhere between 12 to 18, somewhere in that range. That's a good range showing that things are pretty balanced out. But what happens is when this blood leans too alkaline, now this oxygen is trapped there and it can't get down to the tissues where it needs to be. So what the body does is it will slow the rate at which it is breathing in an effort to hold on to more of this CO2. CO2 is acidic and it acidifies the blood. So when the blood is leaning too alkaline for the body to use oxygen correctly, the body's like, hey, I got an idea. I can fix this. Don't worry about it. I'm going to slow the rate at which you're breathing. That means you're going to huff off less CO2. More CO2 is going to stay in the system, and that's going to help acidify this blood a little bit, bring it up here, and now we can use that oxygen. So the body's trying to help the situation. If the blood is leaning too acidic, the body will say, okay, I'm going to speed up the rate at which this person breathes. I'm going to huff off more of this CO2 so that I can bring that balance back where it should be. We want the blood pH to be balanced. So this is actually what can create some of the confusion with a lot of this breath work. If a person slows the rate at which they're breathing, then they're holding on to more CO2, acidifying the blood. And if their blood was leaning a little bit more on this alkaline side, where maybe the oxygen was getting a little bit trapped in the blood, if they slow the rate at which they're breathing, they're using the same mechanism that the body in its wisdom uses. They're just magnifying what the body is doing a little bit. They're slowing the breath rate even more CO2 builds up, it acidifies the blood and helps oxygen get down to those tissues where it should be. That's why a lot of these breath coaches will tell you that, oh, your optimum breath rate should be 6. You want to get it to where your breath rate is around 6. But if your breath rate is 6, that's the body trying to fix a problem. So it's not optimal to put your breath rate to where your body has a problem. Your body's lowering that breath rate to fix the problem. So somebody brings their breath rate down when it might naturally be around 12. When they get it down to 6, they might feel a little bit better in that moment because they've increased the CO2 in the system that help balance this pH out a little bit and help that oxygen utilization. But you're doing that you're trying to fix the problem manually. And when I help you understand why this imbalance can come about in the first place, you're going to see that that's not really going to do anything. That's like trying to go up to an angry dog that's growling at you and grabbing its tail and wagging it and thinking that's going to make the dog happy. Well, a dog has a tail wagging, that's a happy dog. So this mad dog, he's growling at me. He wants to bite me. I'm just going to grab his tail and wag it, and that's going to make him happy. Yeah, you can let me know how that works out. That's not really how we want to do it. We want to fix the actual mechanism that's creating the problem, and then the breath rate will balance out due to the body's ability to stay in that balanced state. So when we're doing some type of deep breathing in and out, or forceful breathing, or hyperventilation, fast breathing type of situation, all of those can force a lot more CO2 out of the system than would normally be forced out. So when you're forcing all of that CO2, you're pushing the blood more alkaline, you're restricting the oxygen's ability to get to where it needs to be, and then the person just passes out. We're wondering why they're passing out. Well, we cut off the oxygen supply to the brain. So it's not a person reaching some spiritual episode. It's the body saying, hey, idiot, stop doing this. If you don't stop doing this, we're just going to knock you out and we'll take over and do it the right way because you clearly don't understand what we're trying to do here. So it's not a thing of getting dizzy as a good thing. It's a thing of your body saying, hey, maybe it's a good idea you stop doing that. Now, of course, not everybody's going to pass out when they're doing these type of breathwork situations. Some people's blood is leaning way too acidic, and that's creating problems. They have a breath rate up in this 22 range because the blood is leaning way too acidic, and that can create all types of other problems. So when they do this fast breath rate, huff off a lot more CO2 and bring this pH down to a more balanced state, they may really feel a whole lot better. But again, that method would be trying to take an angry dog and wagging his tail to make him happy. So people make these videos of, oh, look at the pulse oximeter, now I'm going to do this heavy breathing, and then look, I'm bringing more oxygen in the system because look at what the pulse oximeter is saying. Well, the pulse oximeter rate is going higher because the saturation is higher because you're huffing off all this CO2, making the blood lean too alkaline and trapping the oxygen in the blood. So the pulse oximeter is saying you're doing a great thing, but the reality is you're actually restricting your body's ability to utilize that oxygen. If you want to get an idea of where your breath rate is, what you can do is you can just get like your smartphone and set a timer for a minute so you don't have to watch it. It'll just beep when it's done. And just lie down and relax. Try to breathe normally and just count the number of inhales in a 60-second period. Don't count the inhales as 1 and the exhales as 2. Just count the inhales. And it's a little bit hard to do on yourself because you're sitting there and you're thinking about what you're doing and should I breathe faster? Should I slow down? And it can kind of mess you up a little bit. It kind of takes some practice to really just try to breathe at your normal rate. But if you have somebody else that can test it for you, that can be really helpful. Like if I'm testing this for a client, I just tell them to lie down and tell them I'm going to check their pulse. I don't tell them that I'm going to check their breath rate because I don't want them to know that and to subconsciously affect their breathing. So it's a little bit tricky to do on yourself, but most people can usually get an idea of where they are in this range. And am I down in there in the 6 and 5, or am I up here in a range that might be a little bit more human? But if a person's really wiped out and their breath rate is like 14 and it's in a good range, then it could be other factors that are creating that fatigue. But let's look at some of the things that can affect this pH, because as you can see, the pH can drive the body's breath rate, but this CO2 can also drive the pH. So all of these factors have the ability to affect one another. So let's look at what's going on here a little bit. And the first thing we want to look at is CO2 production. CO2 is a byproduct of processing carbohydrates and sugars, and then we exhale to get rid of some of that CO2. So the amount of carbohydrates or sugars that you're processing can be a factor. And that doesn't mean the amount that you're consuming. Like we see a lot of people that are type 2 diabetics where their breath rate is really low because they're not processing sugars correctly. They may be consuming plenty of sugars and carbohydrates, but they're not processing them, so they're not making very much CO2. And then that blood pH goes very alkaline and the breath rate goes very low in the body's attempt to try to balance that out by holding on to more CO2. So if someone's leaning on that insulin resistance side, that can push that blood more on the alkaline side and create those oxygen utilization issues by the oxygen getting trapped in the bloodstream due to that Bohr effect kicking in. So another thing we need to think about is blood calcium levels. Calcium is one of the most alkaline minerals on the planet. And so there's a lot of things that can cause the body to bring too much calcium into the bloodstream. Calcium likes to follow sugar. So if a person's consuming a lot of carbs and sugar, then a lot of the calcium will leave the tissues where it's really supposed to be, and it'll follow that sugar and stay in the bloodstream. And then that alkaline calcium is going to alkalize the bloodstream, push the blood a little bit more on that alkaline side, and hold more of that oxygen in the bloodstream. So consuming too many carbs or sugars can make this blood lean too far on that alkaline side because of where the calcium is going. So that's something to think about. But also if a person's doing like keto or carnivore where they're eating like no carbs or very little carbs, then it's almost like a type 2 diabetic where the type 2 diabetic is not creating a lot of CO2 because they're not processing carbs. So if the carbs and sugars are not coming into the system, then the body's not creating as much CO2, and that can lean to the blood leaning too alkaline. That's why a lot of people will start off really great on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, and they'll feel like a new person, and oh man, it corrected all these major health issues. And it really can. We're a fan of ketogenic diets. We're a fan of the carnivore diets. I use both of those myself. I cycle in and out of those. I use them with clients. So I'm not saying those diets are bad, but if a person's blood is already leaning on that alkaline side and they go to a keto or carnivore diet, they can really magnify that imbalance that's already occurring. And that's why we see some people that don't do well on a keto or a carnivore diet. That's one of the reasons. There can be other reasons. If you want to understand other issues, we'll put a link in the description below for our video on which people should not use a ketogenic diet. And that talks about some other imbalances that those diets can really magnify and create trouble with. So it's really about understanding your body chemistry and where you are before you can really understand which diet is going to be right for you, right? But that can be a factor. If a person's not eating enough carbohydrates, over time, that can really alkalize that bloodstream. Like for me, I ate keto and carnivore for like 5 years and did great. It took a long time for me to create an imbalance where it really started creating trouble for me, and I had to start cycling carbs in for part of the year. But you can see that there's issues on both sides of the line here that can create the blood leaning too alkaline. If somebody's eating too many carbs and sugars and junk, they may be bringing too much calcium into the blood. And if someone's not eating enough, well, then the body's not going to create enough CO2, and that can cause the blood to lean alkaline. So you can have trouble on either side of these variables. Vitamin D can also be very important. A lot of people, it's very popular nowadays to take, oh, here, I want you to take a bucket of vitamin D every day. And people think that that's a really good idea. But the problem is that vitamin D helps us pull calcium out of the intestinal tract into the blood so the body can use it. So it's really crucial. We really need vitamin D to get that calcium into the system. But when we take these huge doses, then it not only pulls calcium out of the intestinal tract, it pulls calcium from everywhere, even the tissues and the bones, and holds that in the bloodstream. And now we have a lot of calcium in the bloodstream. It's causing that bloodstream to lean too alkaline, and now the oxygen can't get down to the tissues. So too much vitamin D can be very problematic. A person can get an idea of how they're doing here by just looking at their urine pH at least 2 hours after a meal, but not first thing in the morning. And if that urine pH is like 6.2 or higher, that can be a sign that you're peeing out too much calcium and the body's trying to get rid of some of this calcium because you have too much in the blood. So that could be a sign that, hey, maybe I need to take this vitamin D down a little bit, or maybe I need to consume less carbs or sugars, or one of these factors that's pulling too much calcium into the blood. Now, if your breath rate is too low, and like really, 12 and below that is really getting too low. You don't want to see it go lower than that. And if that's the case, a person can take some steps like drinking carbonated water away from food. There's some people that kind of feel like carbonated water has the ability to restrict your ability to get all the nutrients out of your food, and I kind of buy into that a little bit. So I just like to see people drink carbonated water away from food. But you're just looking for plain carbonated water. You're not looking for soda with all this junk and sweeteners and garbage in it. You're just looking for water with carbonation. And that carbonation can add more CO2 to the system. Now, it's not going to be as aggressive as like calcium at alkalizing the blood. It's not going to be able to acidify the blood as aggressively as too much calcium can alkalize it. It's not going to out-battle a mineral because this is just a gas. It's not going to be as strong as a mineral would be. So you might have to correct some of these other issues, but if breath rate is too low, indicating that the blood is leaning too alkaline and that oxygen can't leave the blood, then drinking some carbonated water away from food has the ability to help a little bit. Another step that a person can take is this potato breathing method. And this was a guy who kind of figured out some things, and it's a different breathing method that's out there. And it seems like a lot of the instructors don't exactly understand what the mechanisms are that are creating these troubles, and they may feel like maybe everybody has these problems, but they at least understand the CO2 factor and that we're really trying to dictate what CO2 is doing, and we're not trying to bring more oxygen into the body. But one of the methods that they use that I've seen work very well with people is just to go outside and take a nice easy walk for 20 to 30 minutes and just breathe through your nose. If you keep your mouth shut that whole time, and this is also why a lot of people talk about, taping your mouth shut and some of these other breathing methods. But this potato method of just going outside and just taking a walk with your mouth shut. If you don't want to be talking to your friend while you're walking, if you're walking too fast that you have to open your mouth and breathe more, then you're going too aggressively. You want to make it easier. But the ability to just walk with your mouth shut kind of restricts your ability to breathe a little bit. So you're adjusting that breath rate in a more gentle way. And this seems to have the ability to sort of readjust the CO2 set point in the brain. And so we've seen some people increase their breath rate and kind of balance out the pH of that blood a little bit using this method. So I'm okay with people doing that, and I'd love to hear from you if you've done that, or if you try this, I kind of want to hear how it went from you, and you can put that in the comments below. But just keep in mind that when we're looking at these factors of, all these kind of breath work and, oh, you really should have a breath rate of 6 and people saying that, keep in mind that where a person is really matters. Whether these things are actually going to improve their situation, because a lot of people will do this type of breath work and really improve how they feel all the time, not just when they're doing that. And if a person's way up here and they're really bringing things down, or they're balancing things out in one way or another, then the person really can benefit. But then we're telling everybody that they should do this. And then they're passing out and fainting and telling them that's a good idea. It's really not a good idea. We want to look at the individual and not just the symptom that they're experiencing. So when we look at what's going to turn this around in the long run, we really want to look at these nutritional factors. We really want to look at, what is the CO2 production going on? Are there insulin resistance issues that need to be corrected? If you're leaning on that insulin resistance side, you really have to take steps to improve that. And we'll put a link in the description below for our video on how to improve insulin resistance if that's going on with you. Taking too much vitamin D, it's going to be problematic for some people. So we want to look at what's going on and why the blood is leaning too far on that alkaline side. And then when we can work to correct that, we can really correct the underlying cause of the problem. So I hope this helps you figure out the situation for you and your body chemistry. You can see that the solution is really going to be different for every person. I can't just tell you to do one thing and that's going to work for everybody. That's not how the human body works. You're going to have to do some work to figure out which of these issues is pushing you too far on that alkaline side. And since this vitamin D thing kind of freaks people out a lot, it's pretty rare that somebody's going to tell somebody to use less vitamin D. You can jump over right now and check out our video on who should not use vitamin D to get more insights into whether that could be a problem for you. I can't wait to hear about your results.